what the avoidance coldness really says about their attachment wound. Have you ever been with someone who pulls away just when things start to feel real? You finally feel a spark of connection, and suddenly they go cold. You start questioning what you did wrong. But here's the truth: their distance isn't about you. It's a mirror reflecting their fear of being seen too closely. When someone seems emotionally unavailable, our first instinct is to chase to prove we're safe or to take their withdrawal personally. But what looks like coldness is often self-protection. The avoidant isn't heartless, they're hurtless. They've learned that needing someone equals danger. That opening up means losing control. Somewhere in their past, maybe with a parent, a first love, or a betrayal, they decided that closeness costs too much. So now they build walls where connection should be. Their silence isn't rejection. It's a nervous system saying, I don't know how to feel safe when you get this close. Their independence isn't confidence, it's armor. The avoidance wound whispers, if I depend on someone, I'll lose myself. If I show my need, I'll be rejected. So they pull back before you can. They detach before they can be abandoned. Understanding this doesn't mean you excuse emotional unavailability, but it does mean you stop making it your fault. Their healing is their responsibility, and your healing begins when you stop chasing love that fears being held. If you can hold compassion without self-betrayal, you'll see the truth. Their coldness isn't proof that you're unlovable. It's proof that they were once unloved in the moment they needed love most. Coldness is a defense, not a defect. When someone becomes emotionally distant, it's easy to assume they're indifferent, uncaring, or incapable of love. But that's rarely the full story. The truth is, the avoidance coldness often hides a lifetime of emotional self-protection. It's not that they don't feel, it's that feeling has become dangerous territory. Their withdrawal is a shield, not a sign of emptiness. Imagine growing up in an environment where your emotions were dismissed, where your needs were too much for the people around you to handle. Maybe when you cried, no one comforted you. Maybe when you reached for connection, you were met with inconsistency or even rejection. Over time, you learn a painful lesson: it's safer not to need. You train yourself to survive without closeness, to depend only on yourself, to hold everything in. That strategy becomes muscle memory. It's not conscious, it's automatic. So later in life, when someone gets close, those old defense systems come online like alarms. The body says, danger. The heart says, don't go there. And what looks like emotional coldness is actually self-preservation. When an avoidant partner withdraws, they're not necessarily trying to hurt you. In fact, in their mind, they might think they're preventing harm for both of you. They might believe that too much closeness will create chaos, disappointment, or conflict. Their distance feels like control. It's their way of managing emotional safety. It's not that they don't care about you, it's that caring deeply exposes them to the risk of losing control, and that's a risk they're terrified to take. You might notice this in subtle ways. The avoidant rarely initiates deeper conversations about feelings. When vulnerability starts to enter the space, they change the subject, make a joke, or physically remove themselves. If you express emotion, they may freeze or shut down, not because they're cold-hearted, but because they genuinely don't know what to do with that intensity. Emotion feels like a wave that could drown them, so they build a dam instead. They see your openness as something unpredictable and overwhelming. Their instinct is to pull away, even if part of them secretly longs to move closer. Inside, the avoidant is often conflicted. They crave connection like anyone else. They want to be loved, to be understood, to be held. But the moment they start to feel that possibility, their nervous system screams too much. That's the cruel paradox. They want intimacy, but they fear it. They long for warmth, but their way of staying safe is to turn cold. And this creates a cycle that can feel confusing for anyone who loves them. One moment they're affectionate and present, the next they've withdrawn into silence. But underneath that push and pull isn't manipulation, it's fear. Fear that if they get close, they'll lose themselves. Fear that love will fade once they're truly seen. Fear that if they open up, rejection will come. These fears aren't logical. They're emotional echoes from long before you entered their life. And while those fears may no longer reflect their reality, they still feel real inside the body. The avoidant doesn't just think about safety, they feel unsafe when emotional intensity rises. Their system floods, their heart races, and the only relief they know is distance. That's why coldness can't be fixed by reassurance alone. You can tell them you're safe, you can promise you won't leave, you can express love over and over. But until they learn that closeness doesn't equal danger, their walls will stay up. The transformation comes when they start to realize that they're not in the same emotional landscape they once were. That this time they're with someone who doesn't demand perfection, who won't punish vulnerability, who allows them to be seen without pressure. But even then, progress is slow. Healing an attachment wound isn't about breaking down the walls all at once. It's about helping the avoidant feel safe enough to open a window. Their coldness begins to thaw not through confrontation, but through consistent experiences of emotional safety. Through moments where they're allowed to retreat without being shamed, where their fear is met with patience rather than panic. And this is where perspective matters. When you stop interpreting their distance as a lack of care, you also stop feeding the cycle of anxiety between you. You begin to understand that their avoidance is a story written long before you arrived. It's not personal, it's historical. You didn't cause it, and you can't cure it, but you can see it for what it truly is, a defense mechanism built by someone who once had no other way to survive. So when they go cold, remember, what feels like rejection may actually be protection. What feels like indifference may be exhaustion. What feels like avoidance may be the only way they've ever known to feel safe. The key is to see the person beneath the pattern, the fear beneath the distance, and the longing hidden inside their silence. Because coldness isn't the absence of feeling, it's a heart that's learned to freeze to avoid being broken again. The avoidant fears dependency, not intimacy. On the surface, it might look like they're afraid of love, of closeness, of sharing their heart. But that's not quite it. The truth runs deeper. They're not running from connection itself, they're running from the feeling of needing someone. To the avoidant, dependency feels like surrendering control, and control is the one thing that's kept them emotionally safe. When you've grown up believing that needing others leads to disappointment, rejection, or even abandonment, the idea of relying on someone starts to feel dangerous. In many ways, the avoidant has built their identity around self-sufficiency. They've learned that independence equals safety. They find comfort in being capable in managing life on their own terms, in not having to depend on anyone for emotional stability. It gives them a sense of power, a way to feel grounded when everything else feels uncertain. But beneath that polished independence lies a quiet fear. If I let someone in too deeply, I'll lose myself. If I start depending on you, I might not survive it if you walk away. So they build emotional distance to preserve their autonomy, even when that distance costs them closeness. This fear of dependency doesn't mean they don't want a relationship. Many avoidant individuals crave love just as much as anyone else. They can be affectionate, loyal, and kind. But the moment emotional connection starts to require vulnerability, the moment it asks for reliance or interdependence, they begin to tense up. They might start overanalyzing, finding flaws in the relationship, or convincing themselves they're better off alone. It's not that their heart stops feeling, it's that their mind starts defending. The closer they get to needing you, the more their instincts tell them to pull back. It's almost like a switch flips inside them. When someone starts to become emotionally important, they begin to feel trapped rather than secure. They associate closeness with pressure, expectations, or loss of freedom. Dependency feels like a cage, not a comfort. And because of that, they unconsciously sabotage the very intimacy they long for. They might withdraw, become less communicative, or act as if they're suddenly disinterested. But beneath the surface, they're simply trying to regain equilibrium, to restore that sense of emotional independence that feels like safety. This fear of dependency usually traces back to early emotional experiences. For some, their caregivers might have been unpredictable, loving one moment, distant the next. For others, love came with conditions: behave a certain way, perform a certain role, suppress certain emotions. Over time, they learned that connection was unreliable. Depending on others meant setting themselves up for disappointment. So they made an unconscious vow: I'll never let myself need anyone like that again. It's a vow that once protected them, but now, in adult relationships, it isolates them. When an avoidant person starts to care for someone, that old programming gets triggered. They might find themselves feeling vulnerable, which immediately feels like losing control. They don't always understand why they're pulling away. It's not a deliberate rejection. It's more like their nervous system goes into survival mode. Their body and mind start communicating an urgent message: you're too close. You're about to depend on this person. Retreat before it's too late. And so they do. They create emotional distance, not out of cruelty, but out of fear that they'll disappear inside someone else's expectations. This dynamic often confuses their partners. From the outside, it looks inconsistent. They want closeness, then they avoid it. They express affection, then go silent. But inside, it's a tug-of war between the desire to connect and the need to protect their autonomy. They might feel guilty afterward, frustrated with themselves for pulling away, but the instinct feels stronger than logic. To them, needing someone feels like stepping onto thin ice. They're waiting for it to crack. What makes this fear so powerful is that it's rooted in the belief that love will cost them their identity. That being close to someone will mean losing themselves, their boundaries, their sense of independence. So they guard that independence fiercely. Even when they're in relationships, they often keep emotional distance to maintain control. They might avoid talking about the future, sharing their inner thoughts, or depending on you for comfort. It's not that they don't trust you personally, it's that they've learned not to trust the safety of attachment itself. When you understand this, the avoidance behavior starts to make more sense. Their detachment isn't a lack of interest. It's an attempt to preserve selfhood. They're not rejecting love. They're rejecting the idea that love means losing control. Deep down, they want to feel free and connected, but they don't yet believe those two things can coexist. They've spent so long equating love with sacrifice that interdependence feels suffocating instead of secure. The journey for someone with avoidant tendencies is to learn that closeness doesn't erase independence. That depending on someone emotionally doesn't mean losing yourself. It means sharing yourself. True intimacy doesn't demand control, it offers choice. But to reach that realization, they have to unlearn years of protective conditioning. They have to experience connection in a way that doesn't threaten their autonomy, but strengthens it. And that can only happen when they begin to see dependency not as a loss of power, but as a courageous act of trust. Their silence speaks of past wounds. When an avoidant person pulls away, goes quiet, or shuts down emotionally, what's really happening isn't about indifference, it's about memory. Their silence is not empty, it's filled with echoes of past pain. Every time closeness starts to feel real, something deep within them remembers a time when being open led to hurt. When they stop talking, when they disappear emotionally, it's not that they have nothing to say. It's that their body has learned that saying too much, needing too much, or feeling too much once came with a cost. Avoidant attachment often develops from experiences where emotional expression was met with rejection, punishment, or inconsistency. Maybe they were a child who cried and no one came. Maybe they reached for affection and were told to be strong to stop being needy. Maybe they were made to feel like their emotions were too big, too inconvenient, too embarrassing. Slowly, they began to shut those feelings down. They built a world inside themselves where silence meant safety. Speaking up became dangerous because it led to disappointment or disconnection. So now as adults, they carry that same emotional blueprint into their relationships. When they go quiet, it's not always a choice they consciously make. Their nervous system reacts before they can even think about it. Their brain interprets intimacy as potential danger, and their instinctive response is to withdraw. The silence that follows isn't passive-aggressive, it's protective. It's the only way they know to stop the flood of vulnerability that feels overwhelming. Inside that stillness, they're not calm. They're managing chaos. Their silence is their way of trying to regulate a storm of feelings they don't know how to express safely. For the partner on the other side, this can be deeply confusing. You might feel shut out, unloved, or invisible. You might think they don't care enough to talk, but often the opposite is true. They care so much that the fear of losing that connection makes them freeze. The silence is a wall meant to prevent loss, not create it. But in practice, it ends up creating the very loneliness they fear. Many avoidant people learned early that their emotions weren't mirrored back to them. If they showed sadness, no one noticed. If they showed excitement, it wasn't met with enthusiasm. Over time, they began to associate vulnerability with emptiness, with moments when they reached out and no one reached back. Their current silence carries all of that history. It's not about the present moment, it's about every moment that came before where expressing themselves didn't feel safe or worthwhile. So when you see them go quiet after an argument, when you notice them shutting down, just as you try to connect, understand that you're not dealing with stubbornness, you're witnessing survival. They've learned that silence prevents escalation. They've learned that retreat prevents rejection. To them, withdrawing feels like the only way to protect the relationship from falling apart. It's a coping mechanism built from the belief that conflict and closeness can't coexist. Inside, however, the silence hurts them too. They often wish they could speak, that they could explain what's happening. But the words don't come easily. Emotional language is foreign to someone who wasn't taught how to use it safely. Even when they want to connect, they don't always have the tools to do so. Their silence becomes the only language they know, a way to express fear without words. And while it creates distance, it also provides a strange sense of control. If they don't say anything, they can't say the wrong thing. If they don't open up, they can't be misunderstood. The tragedy is that their silence often gets misinterpreted. Their partner feels abandoned, while the avoidant feels misunderstood. Both sides end up lonely, trapped in the same emotional loop. The more the partner reaches in, the more the avoidant withdraws. The more the avoidant withdraws, the louder the partner's longing becomes. This dance continues until both are exhausted, neither realizing that what drives it isn't disinterest, but fear. Fear born from wounds too old to name. To understand their silence is to see the child inside the adult, the one who learned that being quiet was the safest way to exist. It's to see that every pause, every moment of detachment is an echo of times they weren't seen, heard, or valued. Their quietness is a scar, not an attitude, and though it may feel cold, beneath that surface is a person longing for connection, but terrified of what it might cost them. When you can view their silence this way, compassion begins to replace frustration. It doesn't mean you tolerate being shut out, but it helps you stop taking it personally. Their quiet moments aren't about punishing you, they're about protecting themselves from a pain they haven't yet learned how to name. Inside every silence is a story of survival. It's the sound of someone who has learned that speaking up once led to pain, and who hasn't yet learned that it's finally safe to be heard. Your worth isn't measured by their response. When you care deeply for someone who struggles with avoidance, it's easy to believe that their distance, silence, or inconsistency means something about you. You start to question yourself. What did I say wrong? What did I do to push them away? Why am I not enough to make them stay open? This is the quiet ache of loving someone whose wounds distort their ability to receive love. But their behavior is not a reflection of your value, it's a reflection of their capacity. The way they respond to closeness, affection, or emotional depth comes from their internal wiring, not from your worthiness. An avoidant person doesn't retreat because you are unlovable. They retreat because love feels unfamiliar in the form you're offering it. When someone has learned that closeness equals danger, even healthy affection can feel threatening. Your kindness can make them uncomfortable because it brings emotions to the surface that they've spent years avoiding. It's not that they don't see your value, it's that they can't connect to it fully without confronting their own fears. Their withdrawal is about regulation, not rejection. But when you don't understand that, it's natural to internalize their coldness as something wrong with you. This is how many people end up losing themselves in the cycle of proving. You start to give, to fix, to chase. You think that if you can love them better, softer, smarter, they'll finally stay open. You begin measuring your own self-worth through their moments of engagement. When they're present, you feel secure. When they pull away, you feel worthless. But this cycle slowly erodes your sense of identity. You end up shrinking yourself to fit into their comfort zone, walking on eggshells around their emotional limits, mistaking their peace for your purpose. The tragedy is that in trying to be what they need, you forget what you need. It's crucial to remember that how someone responds to love isn't proof of how deserving you are of it. Emotional avoidance is a coping mechanism, not a commentary on your value. Their inability to connect deeply doesn't mean your love lacks power. It means their walls are strong. You could be the most patient, emotionally intelligent, and loving person, and still they might pull away. Not because you failed, but because they haven't yet learned how to stay. Their inner programming tells them that dependence equals loss, that vulnerability equals danger, and that distance equals safety. Until that programming changes, your closeness will trigger more fear than comfort. When you base your self-worth on someone else's ability to love you, you hand them control over your peace. You let their fear dictate your value. But love built on self-abandonment isn't love. It's survival disguised as devotion. Real love requires two people who can meet each other without one disappearing to make the other comfortable. And that means you can care deeply for someone who struggles with avoidance while still recognizing that their walls are not your fault to dismantle. You can understand their pain without turning yourself into a remedy for it. Sometimes the greatest act of love you can give yourself is stepping back from the story that says, if they loved me differently, I would finally feel enough. You are already enough. Their capacity to connect doesn't determine that. It only determines what kind of relationship they're capable of offering right now. You can't make someone ready to receive the depth of your heart if they haven't yet healed the parts of themselves that fear it. You can invite them into connection, but you can't carry them there. When they go cold, it's not an invitation for you to chase. When they shut down, it's not your cue to try harder. It's a signal of where their limits are. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for both of you is to respect those limits without sacrificing your own emotional needs. You can acknowledge their wound and still choose not to live inside it. You can have compassion for their struggle and still say, I deserve a love that doesn't make me question my worth. Every time you make yourself worth dependent on someone else's behavior, you lose a little piece of your own power. You forget that your value is constant, not conditional. It doesn't rise and fall with how someone sees you or treats you. It's not validated by their approval, and it's not diminished by their avoidance. The avoidance response is a mirror of their fears, not your failures. Their withdrawal is their coping, not your inadequacy. When you truly understand this, something inside you shifts. You stop pleading for validation from someone who's too afraid to offer it. You stop trying to earn what should be freely given. You start standing firm in the truth that your worth doesn't depend on being chosen. It depends on knowing you're enough even when someone else can't see it. And from that place, you begin to love differently. Not from scarcity, not from desperation, but from self-respect. Because you realize that being loved by someone who fears intimacy doesn't define you. How you love yourself through their fear does. Compassion without self-sacrifice is the boundary. When you love someone who struggles with avoidance, your heart naturally wants to understand them. You see their fear, their retreat, their silence, and you start to empathize. You realize their coldness isn't cruelty, it's protection. You can see that behind the walls is a person who's been hurt, who's afraid to need, who doesn't yet know how to feel safe in closeness. Compassion comes easily when you understand where their behavior comes from, but compassion without boundaries becomes self-betrayal. There's a fine line between loving someone through their wounds and losing yourself in the process of trying to heal them. Many people who fall for avoidant partners tend to be naturally empathetic. They can sense the vulnerability behind the defenses, and that makes them want to stay, to help, to prove that love can be safe. But over time, the empathy can start turning into emotional overfunctioning. You start justifying their withdrawal, making excuses for their detachment, and convincing yourself that if you just stay patient enough, they'll come around. You begin to carry both sides of the emotional connection. You feel for them, you reach for them. You do the work to hold the relationship together while they continue to protect themselves from the very intimacy you're trying to build. Compassion without boundaries is dangerous because it slowly drains you while disguising itself as love. You tell yourself you're being understanding when in reality, you're neglecting your own emotional needs. You start to accept breadcrumbs of connection as enough, telling yourself that a few tender moments make up for the long stretches of distance. You start lowering your expectations in the name of empathy, forgetting that love should never cost you your sense of worth. Understanding someone's pain doesn't mean you have to live inside it. It's important to remember that compassion is not the same as tolerance. Compassion says, I see your wound and I hope you heal. Tolerance without boundaries says, I'll shrink myself to make your wound more comfortable. One empowers both people, the other enables the cycle of disconnection. When you give too much understanding to someone who isn't doing the work to grow, you start carrying emotional weight that isn't yours. You start trying to fix what only they can face. Love begins to turn into emotional labor. Healthy compassion allows space for both truth and tenderness. It lets you say, I understand why you're afraid, but I also need emotional availability to feel safe here. It allows you to see their pain without abandoning your own needs. You can care for someone deeply while still recognizing that your role is not to heal them. It's to stay true to what you require in a relationship. That might mean giving them space to face their fears, even if it creates distance. Sometimes compassion looks like staying, and sometimes it looks like stepping back. Both are acts of love when they come from self-respect. Setting boundaries with an avoidant person doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop allowing their fear to dictate your emotional experience. You can empathize with why they withdraw without chasing after them. You can hold space for their struggle without silencing your own loneliness. You can love them without excusing behavior that leaves you empty. A boundary doesn't close your heart. It protects it. It says, I see your pain, but I won't let it become the reason I forget my own. When you hold compassion and boundaries together, you create a space where both people are accountable. You're no longer trying to be their emotional anchor. You're allowing them to develop their own capacity for connection. You're showing them through your consistency and your self-respect that love doesn't mean losing yourself. That safety in a relationship isn't created by one person holding it all together. It's created when both people take responsibility for their emotional patterns. It's easy to think that if you just love them harder, they'll finally stay open. But love that costs you your peace isn't love, it's self-erasure. True love includes empathy, but it also includes truth. The truth that you deserve to feel seen, heard, and emotionally met. The truth that their healing is their job, not yours. The truth that compassion without balance becomes self-abandonment. When you begin to honor those truths, your compassion becomes cleaner. It's no longer mixed with fear or guilt. It's simply love with boundaries. The most powerful shift happens when you stop trying to save them and start saving yourself. When you stop confusing endurance with love and start realizing that staying grounded in your worth is the greatest gift you can bring to any relationship. Your compassion can still be deep, your heart can still be open, but it no longer leaks into places it doesn't belong. You begin to love in a way that doesn't cost you your peace. You show up with empathy, but also with edges, with the understanding that love isn't about fixing what's broken in someone else, but about building something healthy between two people who are willing to meet in the middle. When we look beneath the surface of avoidant behavior, we begin to see that it's never about the coldness itself, it's about the fear underneath it. The fear of needing someone and being let down, the fear of being seen and then rejected, the fear of losing control in love. Every wall an avoidant person builds is a story of survival written in emotional language. And when you start to understand that, you stop taking their distance so personally. You stop seeing their silence as your fault. You begin to see it as a map of where they've been hurt. But understanding someone's wounds doesn't mean you have to walk barefoot through their pain. Compassion is powerful, but it needs boundaries to stay healthy. You can hold space for someone's healing without abandoning your own. You can recognize their struggle without making it your responsibility. Because the truth is, no matter how much you love them, you can't love the fear out of someone. You can only show them what safe love looks like by standing in your own wholeness. So if you find yourself loving someone who fears closeness, let your heart stay open, but let it stay wise too. Don't chase their warmth at the expense of your own. Don't shrink yourself to fit the space their avoidance creates. You are not too much for wanting connection. You are not too emotional for needing consistency. You are simply human, and your needs deserve to be met with presence, not distance. Healing happens not when we force others to open up, but when we stop making their walls our prison. The moment you stop measuring your worth by how much someone can love you is the moment you start reclaiming your power. Love doesn't have to be a place where you lose yourself. It can be a place where both people learn how to stay fully, freely, fearlessly. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for caring enough to look deeper. It takes courage to explore the hidden layers of love, to see not just behavior, but the pain beneath it. Whether you're the one who withdraws or the one who reaches, may this remind you that love isn't about perfection. It's about awareness, growth, and compassion with balance. Take care of your heart. Protect it, honor it, and share it wisely. Because the world doesn't need more people who shut down. It needs more people who love with understanding without losing themselves in the process. Thank you for your time, your openness, and your willingness to learn. And most of all, thank you for choosing growth over comfort. That choice changes everything.